Welcome back to another episode of Learn with Lo. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully everybody's week is off to a fantastic start. I'm excited to pick up our conversations where we left off last time. If you're keeping tabs on our new month and our new series that we're really calling our symptom series. And with this symptom series, I want to be able to really bring to light some conversations and give you guys a little bit of almost like a behind the scenes sneak peek into patient and client conversations, questions and conversations that come up on initial intake forms, and how we really dig in and think about all of the different symptoms, signs of hormonal imbalances, issues that are really impacting someone's daily quality of life, or chronic conditions in which they've been living with for quite some time and been unable to connect the dots or really find answers, how we start to have conversations that are different, right? So with this symptom series, we're going to kind of dive in a little bit not order of priority by any means, but I would say order of commonality. So wanting to really talk about things like energy levels, right? That's where we really picked up last week. I would say the number one symptom that a lot of individuals come to me with is things like fatigue, low energy, energy crashes, or just inappropriate energy, meaning like they feel like they can't peel themselves out of bed in the morning when they should feel energized, or they can't fall asleep, stay asleep when it comes to the evening time, right? So inappropriately distributed energy, I guess we could say. So we got an opportunity to really talk about the difference between an energy drainer and an energy giver. And it has to be both sides of the equation. We're not just going to give our body energy and expect for the best if we're not plugging the holes of things that are draining our energy, or vice versa, right? So that really got us into an honest conversation about how our body produces energy, how our body allocates energy, instead of really expecting that we're going to find answers for energy or fatigue from a traditional lab panel. Yes, maybe there's going to be some things where we can connect the dots, but there's not really going to be a great conventional medicine approach to living our best quality of life. And we don't just have to normalize those types of symptoms, because honestly, a lot of times these symptoms like energy crashes, they're just the signs of bigger issues going on or bigger issues building. They're the initial little red flags that our body is trying to wave to get us to wake up and pay attention. And we just tend to kind of push through and steamroll through because we feel like we know what works best, or we feel like we just can't be slowed down, can't be stopped, and just hope for the best, right? So we reach for things like caffeine to give us a boost of energy, or we reach for things like alcohol for us to wind down or fall asleep. And it's really just learning that we were stealing our energy from tomorrow and trying to allocate it to today, and then we're going into the next day even more drained than we were before, and the vicious cycle just continues. So that's where I really wanted to have a conversation and be able to say like, oh, okay, so if energy is one of these little red flags that my body is waving, what are other red flags? And so today we're going to really dive into probably the second most common symptom that I see on patient intake forms, which is anxiety. Anxiety is one of those things where sometimes we have to be able to tease it apart from just stress. But honestly, in my line of work, if somebody is under an immense amount of stress or more stress than their nervous system can handle, it's going to manifest as anxiety. So regardless of what you call it, tomato, we really want to understand what anxiety is, why our body is having feelings of anxiety, what is that little red flag that anxiety is trying to wave to us, and what are some of the bigger issues that could be really setting us up for if we don't deal with the root cause of that anxiety from the jump. We're also going to talk a little bit too around some of the more conventional practices to deal with anxiety and how those may or may not hit the mark, or more than anything, how we can be using those in conjunction with some more root cause approaches. So it never has to be a this or that. This is not one of those where I feel like everybody's journey is going to be the same, or like completely anti-medication or anti-conventional medicine, because that's just not true at all. I just want to provide at least a better conversation around what's the gray area here, where might I be using some things that actually are really just a big giant Band-Aid on my symptoms, right? And I'm kicking the can down the road to some further or bigger issues. So let's first talk about what anxiety is, what anxiety feels like, and how we kind of define that in general. So when I think about anxiety, again, it is an individual expressing to me that their stress bucket is overflowing. I use this analogy very, very frequently to help explain to people stress and how this conversation around stress management works. We all are given a bucket, right? Some of us have a little bit naturally fuller stress bucket because of some uncontrollable stressors in our life, right? Having multiple children, caring for aging parents, having a full-time job, financial stressors, past history of grief or trauma. I mean, you name it, there's going to be so many different things that are going to stack into this stress bucket as uncontrollable stressors. They're going to be present. We can't do anything about them. Your bucket might naturally just be a little bit more full than somebody else. That's okay. Then we have to realize though, okay, based off of how many uncontrollable stressors are in my bucket, how many controllable stressors do I have room for? If your uncontrollable stressors are high, then you don't have a lot of room for uncontrollable stressors, because the second that your stress bucket starts to overflow, that's when we start to manifest physical symptoms of stress. And this is why we start to hear more and more practitioners talking about the role of stress management, or if a practitioner or provider has told you that your symptoms are the result of stress, or your symptoms are exacerbated by stress, which we talked about in our autoimmune series and in our gut series. That's what we mean, is it's expressing that our body is having a time where our stress bucket is overflowing. And it's our job to really come to the table and recognize that and figure out what controllable stressors can I pull off of the top, right? If we are in a state where our stress bucket is very high or overflowing, it immediately is going to activate something called your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. We have two halves of our autonomic nervous system. We have our rest and digest, and we have our fight and flight. And that fight and flight nervous system is recognized by the brain that's sensing inputs from outside our body and inside our body, right? So it's not just the threats or the stress that we can see or perceive. It's the stuff that we can't see, or unrealized stress too. This is really what we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about today, because I think that this is really, in my world, the missing key that people aren't really looking into or diving into when they are experiencing things like anxiety, and they're just slapping Band-Aid solutions on it because they're only dealing with what they can see. And 9 times out of 10, what they can see as stressors, they can't control. And so then we just get stuck in this vicious loop of practitioners and providers telling us like, oh, you just need to reduce your stress. You need to control your stress. And we're looking at them like, yeah, no, duh, I do. But the only stressors that either of us are really thinking about or talking about are the ones that we can see. And 9 times out of 10, they're the ones we can't control. And so here we are stuck in this conundrum of like, well, I can't fix it. So we feel hopeless. We feel defeated. We feel like, okay, so that person pretty much just told me that there's no way that I can heal or feel better until I'm living in some society that has no stress. No, that is not helpful. That's not pertainable to anybody. So anxiety really is when we have our stress bucket that is overflowing. And anxiety manifests when we get that stress bucket overflowing and we end up being stuck in this chronic state of fight or flight. We may not recognize it. We know that we don't feel great, but like you said, we're not really given solutions to fix it, because the only solution we hear is we need to reduce our stress, and the only stressors that we perceive are ones that we can see, and those ones we can't necessarily control. So what the heck are we doing about it, right? So it just really kind of fuels this anxiety wheel. And so anxiety to me is someone expressing that they're not able to handle the stress loads of their life. They're also starting to feel some of the physical symptoms of stress. Anxiety can feel like heart palpitations. It can feel like chest tightness. It can feel like gut issues. That's a big one. Whether it's constipation, it's bloating, urgent or loose bowel movements, Anxiety can also feel like headaches. It can also feel like muscle, joint pain, tension. It can feel like insomnia. So many different ways in which anxiety like physically manifests in our body. So then we think we have all of these separate issues when in reality we have just like one issue that is sending all sorts of downstream consequences to it. So when we start to kind of trace back, pull back, we can really start to look at, okay, anxiety is a pretty major red flag that our body is trying to wave here, and it's having lots of downstream metabolic consequences. And instead of just focusing on those symptoms, why don't we trace back and start focusing on the root of the issue, which is going to be more of this anxiety response, right? So we understand we all have a stress bucket. When your stress bucket is overflowing, that's going to activate your fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. And when that stays activated, we have anxiety that manifests as a myriad of different physical symptoms. On the same page, right? Now, when we tend to address more of a conventional medicine model about this, we tend to get a little bit of a lost or a dead end approach. And that's just simply because, one, we usually don't chirp up about it until it's really an issue. Right? We usually have to have tried multiple different things on our own to say something about it. We also probably have been dealing with this anxiety, but then we covered it up and pushed and kicked the can down the road, and now it's a bigger issue. And so we're not just going to the doctor with anxiety, we're going to the doctor with anxiety and gut issues and insomnia and weight loss resistance and yada yada, right? So by the time we chirp up, it's usually like a bigger deal now. And so a lot of times when we go into a conventional field like that, they might be treating some of the downstream problems because they're only hearing what you communicate with them, right? 9 times out of 10, a lot of people leave out a lot of the mental health aspect of that. They're going to go in and complain about things like constipation. They're going to complain about the joint pain. They're going to complain more about the headaches. They're going to complain about the insomnia. So then that practitioner, that provider is going to treat those symptoms. When in reality, the symptoms are probably just a downstream consequence of a bigger root cause that they don't necessarily have the time or the bandwidth to really dig into. They just hear your symptom, treat your symptom, and you're on the way. Right? And then that's when those solutions don't tend to work because they were really just a Band-Aid that was put on a bigger issue, right? So we run into issues because normally in that conventional model, we don't have the adequate testing. There's not a whole lot of time for adequate patient intake to really dig into, like, are we complaining about these symptoms, or is it really kind of tying back to something bigger? And also there's not a whole lot of understanding or conversations around things like, nutrition, lifestyle, sleep, mental, emotional state, hormone balance, and how all of those can really play a part too. If we do go into a more conventional state, or practitioners to help us with anxiety, we usually get anti-anxiety medications, which can absolutely be helpful, and they can be definitely part of a tool in the toolbox, as long as we're using those medications to really dig into the root cause, because otherwise it's just a Band-Aid that we're just taking every day because we haven't really dealt with the bigger issue, and or we get referred out to a professional that specializes in things like anxiety, whether that's a psychologist, a psychiatric, some sort of function like that, right? Many individuals don't find these Band-Aid solutions very helpful. I have lots of mental health practitioners that I work with, and I love them dearly, and a lot of people get really great success with that. And then there's a small population of people that don't really benefit as much from the talk therapy because they feel like it kind of keeps them ruminating or kind of going over the same things over and over again, or they're not really able to develop the tools to be able to kind of handle that anxiety front on the outside, right? So you guys have probably heard it too. There's people that are like, oh yeah, I've been to therapy for 5 years now and like still dealing with anxiety. It's like, okay, that's probably because we're missing some tools in the toolbox. We have probably 1 or 2 tools at our disposal, but there might be this whole other sector that we haven't even talked about yet because we've only been treating anxiety from the head, right? We have so many tools, and our conventional medicine system just loves to compartmentalize people. It's like we just push the head off of the body, and it's like, here's your head over here, here's your arm over here, here's your leg over here, here's your stomach, here's your heart, here's your intestines, and I'm like, our body does not work that way, right? It is not a bunch of just different organs and different systems, and each one of those organs and systems needs its own treatment strategy. Hell no, it all relates back together. So that's really the definition of what functional medicine and functional practitioners should be thinking about, is like, we want to make you human again. We want to put all of the parts and the pieces together and really look at how do these impact each other, ratios and relationships. So as I start to think about looking at anxiety on an initial intake form, looking at some of the downstream symptoms that anxiety might be manifesting on initial intake form, I'm going to be thinking completely different, right? I'm understanding and respecting the role of the brain and the head, but anxiety a lot of times is more a body first, brain second type of approach. And let me explain what I mean by this. We get so many different treatments out there that get us so into our head, but they leave us disassociated from our body. And by doing that, then we're just treating the brain in a silo, and treating our thoughts and our beliefs in a silo, when a lot of it is very, very interconnected to our body as well too. And there's a large part of this that can be influenced by different hormonal patterns as well too. So when I try to think about anxiety, I know that I have lots of different tools in my toolbox to refer out to other practitioners and specialists that can help me give that person some tools for the head. But a lot of times they've tried those tools and they've exhausted those tools, and then they're coming to me being like, there's a different answer. I'm like, yeah, have you started looking at a body first perspective to your anxiety, or looked at some of the reasons why your body might be producing those anxious thoughts, or why your body might be overwhelming and overflowing your body's stress bucket and keeping you stuck in fight or flight? Most of the time they haven't. And that's because it's not stressors that we can see. And that's all that we really get attuned to in more of a conventional or traditional medicine approach, is the stressors that we can see from the outside, which usually we can't control, which then if we feel out of control makes us feel more anxious. Therefore, the cycle continues. And here we go, round and round on a merry-go circle. And I just don't see people getting off of that very easily. So when we can kind of marry in, okay, the body experience of what may be contributing to this anxiety, how can we pull some of those unrealized stressors out of the stress bucket and start to really lower that overall overflowing stressor and give you a little bit more capacity. And now the day-to-day stressors don't bother you. They're not so triggering anymore. My anxiety feels so much lessened because I pulled some of those unrealized stressors off. So body first, brain second is how I tend to tackle anxiety, not because I don't see the utility for the brain approach, but most of the time when individuals come to me, they've already exhausted the brain approach, or they have some of those practitioners and things on hand already. Like 9 times out of 10, most of my patient intake forms, they're already on an anti-anxiety medication, and or they're already seeing a therapist on a regular basis. Cool. So my job isn't to reinforce and be like, yeah, just keep doing those things harder. Like, no, those things are obviously tools in the toolbox, but they must not be the complete picture. So where's the body? What's missing? And that's where I come in with a completely different approach. We're going to look at the body first and how we can really use that to complement some of the brain work that they're getting their hands on as well too. So when I think of body first, I'm going to start to look at some of these unrealized stressors. So number 1, blood sugar imbalances. Absolutely, I have to get individuals off of the blood sugar roller coaster based off of what they eat, when they eat, how they eat it, all of how much they're eating, because blood sugar lows can feel like anxiety. They can feel like panic. Some people even get a full-on panic attack. I've had individuals that are waking up in the middle of the night, 2, 3 a.m. with like a panic attack, or they're waking up like really ruminating on thoughts, right? And it's like, that's a blood sugar low, right? That is something that we can absolutely control. And by working on nutritional patterns, lifestyle patterns, strategic supplementation patterns, they're like, not only am I staying asleep, but even if I do wake up, I'm not panicked. I'm like, yeah, so this was a body thing. This wasn't a brain thing that was gonna be fixed with more meds or more therapy. Like, there's a true visceral physiological reaction for your stress. So blood sugar imbalances are going to be a big one. I need to start digging in and asking questions on, is this individual under eating? Are we chronic dieting? Are we eating enough protein? Are we eating enough fiber? Is this individual counting macros but eating processed foods? Is this person playing the hypoglycemic band-aid game and like snacking every couple hours? Is this individual under muscled and or sedentary? Low muscle mass, huge blood sugar imbalances. So those two play hand in hand pretty well together too. So body first, number one, correcting blood sugar imbalances is exactly where I'm going to go after. Number two, I'm going to look at this individual's overall cortisol levels. High cortisol, low cortisol, wanting to make sure that they're in that good Goldilocks zone, making sure that we're checking off the list of poor sleep habits, whether that's inconsistent sleep, whether that's inappropriate light exposure, like not enough natural light, too much artificial light. Things like caffeine dependency can play a role in cortisol. Overall job, stress, do they have stress releasing activities and practices in their day? Things like that. Number three, we can definitely look at the gut. Gut dysbiosis is a really big one that can contribute to anxiety-based symptoms, whether that's not enough beneficial bacteria, which then allows for an overgrowth of some pathogenic bacteria. There's specific strains. I won't bore you guys with all of the Campylobacter and Bifido strains and all of these different strains of bacteria that are actually being connected to various mental states, whether that's anxiety or depression, but definitely looking at the state of the gut. I will say that long-term use of PPIs or proton pump inhibitors or antacids can also exacerbate these types of things because we need stomach acid. That's what fights off a dysbiotic environment. So really looking at their diet as well too. Are they on a strict or a long-term elimination diet, especially if it's keto or low plant diversity and they're not getting a lot of plants, whether they're, like I said, keto or carnivore are usually the two kind of labeled diet patterns that can really play into poor gut dysbiosis patterns as well too. Number four is going to be low progesterone. This is going to apply for my ladies out there, but low progesterone is very, very commonly tied to more anxiety, insomnia, night sweats, palpitations, headaches, things like that, right? So very much there's a hormonal profile here too. Progesterone is created through ovulation. So if you as a female are not consistently ovulating, then you're probably not consistently creating a whole lot of progesterone. So this can either happen if we're on hormonal birth control where we're not ovulating. This can also happen as we phase into perimenopause or menopause because we stop ovulating. So a lot of times even just some progesterone can be very, very helpful for anxiety, something that's very bioidentical of like what your body should be producing, or looking at ways in which we want to support your body's natural production of progesterone through reducing cortisol, balancing blood sugar, all of those types of good things as well too. And then number five, from a body first perspective, goes back to that nervous system. I need to look at, is this person's body stuck in a state of fight or flight? Are there past or present traumas that we need to refer out for? Is there lack of boundaries being set in their life? Do they have unrealized stress? Do they have stress releasing practices in their day or not? Are they just that person that like takes on stress and they just like stuff it and stuff it and stuff it until it like builds to the point where they're like trying to either hyper control or comfort that stress? None of those things are going to bode really well for anxiety. So overall, I just wanted to roll through and give you guys a little bit of my look behind the scenes of when I see these red flag symptoms come up. We're having bigger conversations than just the head, right? We can definitely go for, like I said, anti-anxiety medications. We can go for calming supplements and herbs. Absolutely, we can do that. We can also go for things like talk therapy and really talking about what are those anxieties and some better, coping strategies and belief systems around that. Cool. We can utilize those tools and go after the head, but what about when those don't work? Or what about when they work at first and then they stop working? I see that very frequently, especially with a lot of like the stress calming herbs and adaptogens. I'm a big fan. Like, let's put those in, but they are what they are. They're a Band-Aid. They're not helping you really figure out what is your unrealized stress and why is your stress bucket so high, and how do we give you a better stress bucket capacity. We can absolutely use some of these brain first things to help you feel better in the moment, but we need to put those on board while we're working on the body first and why there's the anxiety present in the first place, and start to figure out what your unique contributing factors might be. It's not just necessarily one, could be a combination, could be just one, but that's really what I do. That's my job, is to help people recognize, like, body first, where these might be coming from, and how we're going to put in some intentional changes into their nutrition and their lifestyle and their movement, and really just how they live their life to be able to combat it. Those are my prescriptions that I use. So if that resonated with you at all, pass it on, share it with friends and family, so that everybody can start to really think bigger than just a head game, but like getting out of our head and getting into our body is going to be a key piece for our overall anxiety management. So if this anxiety management is also manifesting into some other and bigger symptoms, specifically thinking about, like I said, even some of those weight loss resistance patterns. If you have been following on my stories, I've been promoting my weight loss resistance webinar, which is going to be this Wednesday, June 14th at 5 p.m. Central Time. If you have not registered for that free masterclass yet, make sure that you click the link in my stories to register for that. I'll also try to drop the link below on this video too. If you register, even if you can't join live, I'll send you a recording of that as well too. So again, just know that a lot of times some of these symptoms might pop up, but they're even part of a bigger picture as well too. So be on the lookout for more symptom series as we dive into this Learn with Low month, and hope you guys all have a wonderful week.